The Hawk, the Hound, and the Butterfly. Chapter 1. Apollo. The autumn cool faltered as a warm gust of wind kissed Apollo's cheeks. A boy he'd known since school toppled over the parapet. His body bounced up and floated, face down in the moat beneath. An image he'd thought he'd long forgotten popped into his mind for a moment. "Oh, play it again, Lolo," she said. Apollo smiled. He looked down at his little sister Artemis, lying on the grass beside him. The wind had tousled her long blonde hair across her face. She didn't care to move it. Her skin was fair and flawless, untouched by time nor circumstance, just like the women in the paintings that hung throughout their father's throne room. Her wide brown eyes that always seemed to get what they wanted pleaded as she looked up at him. Apollo remembered now where he was, safe and at ease. "Fine, just stop calling me Lolo," Apollo said, playfully poking Artemis in her stomach. She clutched at her waist and feigned an injury, but couldn't keep a straight face for long enough to convince Apollo she was in any actual pain. Apollo chuckled, not sure if it was her poor attempt to fool him or her laugh that made him smile. Apollo stretched his fingers, like his mother had always reminded him to do before playing, and began strumming the strings of his old lyre. It was a soft, sweet melody that their mother would sing to them when they were babies. The birds chirped as if they were singing along. The leaves in the trees above them swayed as if they were dancing to the music, their rust colour signalling the end of another autumn. Artemis hummed along. She hadn't been taught the words before their mother passed, and Apollo couldn't bring himself to sing them again, but she'd heard him play it many times before. The lyre he played had once been their mother's, now worn out and faded, just like his memories of her. Those who had known her said he reminded them of her. Apart from his blonde hair and blue eyes, Apollo never saw what they did. They didn't know Apollo anyway. His mother never saw the things he had seen, and would never do the things that he did every day, things that had left more than the bruises and scars on his skin, things that woke him up in the middle of the night or whispered to him when he was alone. What would she think of him if she saw her child as he is today, a young man, standing before her? She couldn't possibly see any of herself in him. Apollo pushed the thought from his mind. He concentrated on his fingers as they strummed across the strings. A pain shot up his left arm. Apollo winced, and his playing halted. He shook out his arm and stretched his fingers. Perhaps just a little rusty, he thought to himself. Too long spent away. He continued playing from where he'd left off. "Does it hurt?" Artemis asked, lightly tapping her fingers on the bandage around Apollo's left shoulder. Apollo's eye twitched. "It does if you keep poking it," he said, poking out his tongue at her. Artemis scrunched up her nose at him. "Well, I'm glad you're back, Lolo, even if it is because you're injured." "Wait, when was I injured?" Artemis giggled. "Just keep playing." Apollo strummed a new tune as he leaned back against the tree. The healers had said that he'd strained his shoulder from frequent use, and since it had already been aggravated from a previous injury, it would take at least 4 weeks to return to full strength. They'd recommended an additional 2 weeks off of duties, as he would be unable to fulfill them to his fullest potential. Apollo wasn't sure what they'd meant by that, but he was glad for the extra time off, and to be back at home with family, at least some of them. Artemis had become somewhat of a figment of his imagination lately. She was growing up so fast that he hardly recognized her when she'd come out to greet him on his homecoming. Of course, she couldn't wait to tell him everything that she'd been doing since he left, and he'd been gone for so long that the stories seemed endless. But her playful stories were a welcome distraction from the dark thoughts that constantly plagued him. He hated that he wasn't there for her more, but truthfully, it wasn't her that needed him. A low humming sound started in the distance. Apollo pulled his fingers away from the lyre and sat up. Artemis was still lying beside him, bobbing her head side to side, her feet tapping on a tree root. Apollo looked out at the trees. He could still hear the low buzzing, a somewhat mechanical noise. The workshop district was on the other side of the city, and the mechanics would never come into this part of the woods to test their machines. So what could it be? "Why'd you stop?" "Artie, shh," Apollo said, holding his index finger against his lips. He closed his eyes and focused on the sounds. River gushing, leaves rustling, Artemis shifting on the grass, and a low hum. "The birds have stopped singing," Apollo said, placing his lyre on the ground and rising to his feet. "Maybe it's because you've stopped playing." Artemis tapped on his lyre. Apollo searched the trees for any sign as to where the noise could be coming from. Something wasn't right. His senses told him so, and they'd gotten him through a lot. A flash in the distance caught his eye. "Did you see that?" he asked Artemis. Artemis looked up at him and shrugged. The flash, he saw it again, only this time it was brighter, closer, hiding in the trees. "Artemis, hop up." Artemis rolled onto her back. "I don't want to go yet," she said. The flash appeared again. It was moving faster, coming closer towards them. "Artemis, get up," Apollo said. He grabbed her by her elbow and hoisted her to her feet. "Hey, what's—" The flash of light burst through the trees, spraying shades of a sunburnt sky through the air. "Let's go, come on." Apollo grabbed his lyre in one hand and had a firm hold of Artemis with the other. They took 2 steps forward before they froze. A few paces in front of them hovered a silver metal sphere, roughly the size of a melon. A blue light blinked at them like an eye, watching their movements. Keeping his eyes fixed on the sphere, Apollo leaned down and whispered to Artemis, "Get behind the tree." Artemis squeezed Apollo's hand and broke away from his grasp, slowly backing away. The sphere continued to hover at Apollo's eye level. Apollo adjusted his grip on his lyre and slowly raised it above his shoulder. He took a swing at the sphere. It flew at Apollo's head as fast as an arrow. Apollo ducked, and it missed him by a hair. The sphere turned and started for him again. Apollo reloaded, swinging his lyre at the object. It connected. A jolt surged up Apollo's arm and through his shoulder. The lyre fell from his grip and tumbled across the grass. Apollo had managed to do more damage to himself than the sphere. It hovered between the trees with barely a scratch. Apollo wished he'd had his bow and a few good arrows with him. The sphere flew towards Apollo again. He flung himself to the ground and tumbled towards where his lyre lay. The sphere grazed the top of his head. A bright line of red blood seeped across his light blonde hair. "Lolo, are you okay?" Artemis poked her head out from behind the tree. Apollo clenched his fingers around his lyre and got to his feet. "Artemis, stay behind the tree. Apollo cried out. He flung his head high into the sky, his back arching. The sphere emerged from behind him. It flew up through the canopy of the trees and disappeared. A lump had already started to rise from Apollo's lower back. He sucked in a breath and fell to his knees, hands gliding across the grass, hoping to find his fallen lyre. A rustling from above took his eyes. There was nothing but leaves waving back at him. "Lolo?" Artemis called. Apollo jolted his head towards her voice. She waved the lyre in her hands and tossed it over to him. Apollo stretched his arm out and caught it as a pain surged down his spine. Leaning on the lyre, Apollo got to his feet. "Behind you!" Artemis shouted. In one clumsy movement, Apollo grabbed his lyre and spun round. The lyre connected with the sphere, propelling it back through the trees. A breath he didn't know he'd been holding escaped Apollo. The low hums started again. Apollo looked up to see the sphere hurtling back towards him. With fingers firmly grasped around his lyre, Apollo pulled his arms back. He waited. As the sphere rapidly closed in on him, Apollo kept steady. The sphere got barely meters in front of him. Apollo swung, Splinters flew off the lyre as it whacked into the sphere. It threw Apollo off balance, and he collapsed on the ground. Apollo panted like he'd just sprinted from the castle to the forest. His back was throbbing and his shoulder was pulsating. The sphere floated in place, slowly turning from side to side, the blue light on it blinking, as if it were thinking of its next move. Apollo slowed his breathing. His fingers wrapped around his damaged lyre as he slowly rose to his feet. The sphere turned, and the blue light met his eyes. Apollo swung at it. Wood and strings flew over Apollo's head. A jagged crack ran down across the blue light. The sphere hit the ground with a thud. Apollo dropped to his knees beside it. His mother's old lyre was now not much more than kindling. What would she think of his new playing techniques? "Artemis, it's okay. You can come out now. It's dead." 2 brown eyes poked out from behind the tree. Apollo smiled and waved her over. Artemis moved like a timid fawn, eyeing the trees surrounding them. Her feet froze a few steps away from him. The color drained from her face. "It's okay, Artie. I'm fine. See?" Apollo held out his hands, turning them over for her to see. Artemis shook her head. She raised a shaky arm and pointed behind Apollo. The smile dropped from his face. He turned to see the sphere hovering behind him. As slowly as he could, Apollo got to his feet and stepped back towards Artemis. He put his arm across her and guided her behind him, so he was between the sphere and her. A bright light emanated from the sphere. It whirred and shook. Metal clanged and gears grinded inside of it. The light grew brighter and brighter, becoming unbearable to look at. Apollo turned and wrapped his arms around Artemis. "Close your eyes," he shouted over the growing noise from the sphere. "Close them tight." Artemis tucked her head into Apollo's chest and pressed her hands against her ears. Artemis's body shook in Apollo's arms. "It's okay, I'm here," he said, not knowing if she even heard his attempts to comfort her, but maybe they were trying to comfort himself. The light blared throughout the forest. It flashed, then instantly faded. The forest grew calm once again, just the wind rustling through the leaves and the water trickling along in the distance. Apollo rubbed his eyes until the black spots that obscured his vision disappeared. He broke away from Artemis and looked behind him. Hovering before them were 2 identical floating spheres, each half the size of the original. But now they had lights that blinked red. "Run!" Apollo pushed Artemis away. Without hesitation, Artemis bolted through the trees, leaping over tree roots and fallen branches. She was no timid fawn. It seemed she was more a deer. The same could not be said for Apollo. With his breathing labored and clutching at his shoulder, he stumbled after Artemis, trying to keep up with her whilst keeping himself together. They just had to make it to the city. Those big stone walls would protect them. And if the guards at the gates couldn't stop the spheres, any farmer or merchant could. Just about everyone carried a weapon nowadays. Apollo seemed to have forgotten that when he told Artemis he'd take her out into the forest earlier that morning. Apollo's clumsy feet misplaced themselves. He lost his balance and made friends with the ground. He cursed the rock that had found his feet. "Apollo!" Artemis called. She stopped running and turned back towards him. "No, Artemis, keep going," he shouted. "Don't stop." A sphere flew straight over Apollo's head and caught up to Artemis. It began to spin ferociously around her. "Artemis, run!" Summoning strength from somewhere deep within himself, Apollo got to his feet, swiping up the rock he had tripped on. He hobbled closer towards his sister, but was halted by the second sphere. It mirrored his movements, obstructing his view of Artemis. Apollo swatted at the sphere with the rock, but it easily dodged his attempts. "Apollo, help!" Artemis cried. With the sphere spinning around her, Artemis had no chance of escaping it. The crack of fear in her voice quickened Apollo's heart. His blood bubbled through his veins. His breathing accelerated. Apollo cried out and swung the rock into the sphere in front of him. The sphere went flying, whacking into several tree branches. Artemis stood as still as a statue. Her muscles were tensed and her eyes didn't blink. The sphere rose from behind her. Its red light blinked, and with a flash, both Artemis and the sphere were gone. Artemis? Apollo's eyes searched the spot where she had just been. Artemis? Apollo clambered towards the spot she had just stood. Artemis! Apollo cried out. The second sphere returned. It whacked into Apollo's shoulder, causing another jolt of pain to run through his body. The sphere began to spin around him, just as it had done to Artemis. Apollo stretched his fingers around the rock, just like his mother had taught him. The sphere whooshed past, teasing and taunting, but Apollo was patient. In a quick movement, Apollo raised the rock and brought it down in an arc in front of him. It nicked the side of the sphere and it veered off course. Propelled by whatever force kept it up, it flew off through the trees. Apollo heard a splash. He stumbled over to the river and found the sphere floating on the surface, bobbing up and down. Smoke rose from it. It shook violently and then let off a defeated growl. The red light faded. It sunk to the bottom of the river, and it was as though it was never there. Apollo turned away and headed towards the city as fast as his feet would take him.